Tsunami advisories, as we discussed, in effect across the West Coast and even into Northern California. A tsunami warning, the far northern part there. This after a powerful 8.8 magnitude earthquake off the coast of Russia Tuesday afternoon. We're tracking impacts on the Washington coast. Join us this morning, the director of the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network, Dr. Harold Tobin, a friend of Good Day Seattle. Thank you for joining us. Harold, no major damage in Hawaii. Their evacuation orders have been lifted. Advisory still in effect. I mean, what do you think of the situation this morning? What do people need to know?
Yeah, I mean, it's very encouraging that it looks like the worst case scenarios for this event haven't come to pass. The size of earthquake that happened and the position of it meant that these tsunami advisories and alerts were absolutely warranted. So far, looks like we've dodged the worst. As you've said just before, in Washington, the advisory is still in place, and there's still the possibility of currents, surges, and especially harbors and marinas. But yeah, looking good so far.
And is it still true that we're not expecting that advisory at this point to be extended to other places? It's not in effect for Everett, Seattle, Tacoma. What do you think is next with this advisory situation?
Yeah, I imagine what's most likely is that the advisory will stay in place for some more hours and they'll watch the tide gauges and then cancel it when the all clear is ready. But no, I don't expect it to be extended to any more areas, and I would be really surprised if the alert level was upgraded at all at this point.
All right, that's a good breakdown. Now, Harold, this happened, in Russia, and we had many hours of a heads up. But if the big one happens off of the Cascadia subduction zone off of our coast, a tsunami could be very imminent afterwards. What does that hypothetical look like?
Yeah, this earthquake is kind of a mirror image of the Cascadia subduction zone on the other side of the Pacific. It's also a subduction zone. It's the same kind of earthquake that the Cascadia could be, 8.8. Could very easily be the kind of scale we're at. And the nearby coast was affected by up to something like, 25 or 30 feet high tsunami surges, very damaging in Kamchatka, Russia. So Cascadia would be similar if the earthquake happened here. And then the tsunami arrival time after the earthquake at the coastline is only a matter of, depending on where you are, anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes or so, just a very short period of time for people to actually evacuate from the hazard zone.
So we have, alerts that would be sent out to your phone, lots of work going around with the Shake app. And then, sirens, emergency plans along the coast. Do you think we have all the infrastructure in place for these coastal communities if the big one happens?
Well, unfortunately, we absolutely don't have all the infrastructure in place. There are many regions where actually evacuating would be really challenging. You can imagine the immediate gridlock and bottlenecks in some places. There are parts of our coastal communities where evacuation to higher ground really isn't possible. We need those what are called vertical evacuation structures, fortified buildings, or even special purpose towers that people can go up instead of away in order to get away from the tsunami. We're just beginning to be able to have that equipment and infrastructure here in Washington state, and we have a long way to go, unfortunately. I will say, though, that the earthquake itself is the best advance warning. All those alerts you mentioned are important features, but if you feel very strong shaking and you're by the sea at the coast, it's important to move to higher ground.
Yeah, people need to have their emergency plan, know what they would do in that type of scenario. Now, something that isn't talked about maybe often enough in media is that the Seattle fault here would be even more devastating for us than if a big one was to go off along the subduction zone. Is that right? And what would those impacts look like here?
Yeah, here in Seattle and in the population centers in Puget Sound, the faults like the Seattle fault, and there's another called the Tacoma fault, have less frequent earthquakes, but they really are our sort of worst case event scenario. The shaking will be very strong for a Seattle fault earthquake, and it could potentially produce a localized tsunami inside the sound, which would have really damaging effects along the shoreline. Fortunately, those events seem to be quite rare. The last one was apparently more than 1,000 years ago, but there's the possibility of a future Seattle fault event, and that's another thing we need to prepare for.
If a Seattle fault earthquake happens, what do people need to do in the city? How far away would they need to get for higher ground?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, number one, drop cover and hold on. You know, the shaking will be strong, and we want people to make themselves safe during the actual earthquake shaking. In a scenario like that, then the tsunami would actually arrive very quickly because, of course, Elliott Bay and the Sound is a pretty enclosed small area. What it means is get to, you know, whatever you can, 30 feet above the water line. It doesn't mean the whole city has to go to the top of the hill. Fortunately, we have a lot of hills. We have a lot of topography in Seattle. We can get to higher ground, but you know, 30 feet above sea level, 100 feet above sea level is a reasonable, truly safe distance, and for many of us, that's only a few blocks inland away from the water's edge.
Oh my gosh, this is such helpful information. Dr. Harold Tobin, Director of the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I'll go ahead and send it back to you.